Good afternoon and welcome. We are in Freshman English, and now we are going to give a brief tutorial on basic syntax, basic grammar. And so you'll be wanting to watch my whiteboard now for the hour. Let me say this out loud. Once I give you this intel, I hold you responsible for this intel, which is to say, once I've said the information that I'm saying to you this hour, I will then begin to look for some of these errors in your papers, all right? I feel it necessary for me to review some basic grammar rules and understandings before I begin to hold you responsible. Also, this will allow for you to know that as I begin to read your papers at level 2 and more particularly level 3, and I begin to scrutinize more closely your manuscript, there are certain kinds of errors I'll be looking for, grammatically speaking, and you want to be prepared then to go through a process of editing correctly so that you can then find these errors. Let's begin with, first of all, definitions, followed then by some declensions. Definitions. First of all, I'm going to use this word syntax or grammar. Let's go ahead now and define it. When we are talking about grammar, we are talking about the rules of spoken or written language. Key word, rules. Okay? Rules. Now, this grammar rule understanding can be of two kinds. You can have an informal rule, and you can have a formal rule. Now, what is the informal rule? Okay? The informal rule is going to usually be rules of spoken or written language that are specific to a small group, and these rules are often changing. Okay? So they're going to be rules of a small group, informal group, and they change all the time. So for example, you and your buddies are talking, I walk up, clearly something is being said that's positive, and I say groovy. Now you all laugh. Now you know that I, if saying groovy, am saying positive, not negative, correct? Then why the laughter? Well, because Mr. McGee, we don't use this term anymore. A long time ago in the halls of Orland High School, groovy denoted, good, but not anymore. To which I might ask a question that one or two of you will go, well, yeah, that's a really good question. Why is it that groovy doesn't get used anymore? Like, did somebody walk around with a clipboard and say, in the past we used groovy, now we are changing the word groovy to a different word, and if you use groovy, now we're going to give you a checkmark X, and at 3 of those you are demoted. No. Where did it go? Where did groovy go? Well, see, here again, this is an informal kind of grammar rule, right? So it's going to change all the time. Do you understand? Do you got me? So, for example, did you ever sit in a class where you asked the teacher, can I go to the bathroom? And the teacher said what?
I don't know, can you?
I don't know, can you? Of course, now we were really, what was going on here was a distinction was being made between informal grammar rules and formal grammar rules, right? In other words, the distinction that the instructor was trying to make was the distinction between can you go to the restroom versus may you go to the restroom, you see, and there was this distinction was being made. Of course, the instructor knew exactly what you were asking, right? I mean, it wasn't like there was some confusion about what was meaning here. It was a matter of the rules in regards to informal versus formal grammar. Now, let's keep going. We will be spending our time now talking about these formal rules. This is what we would call standardized rules for a larger group, right? Usually the academy, that is to say schools, okay? And these rules, they do change, but they change very slowly, okay? Very slowly. Distinctions between who and whom, for example, is now an ongoing debate. And there are lots of academics who begin to say, you know what, that's a distinction that we really don't need to be bothered with anymore. And there are a lot of these kinds of rules that are changing, but changing very gradually. So, for example, don't say ain't, it's not proper grammar. Well, technically speaking, ain't is a part of informal grammar, and therefore I can use it any time I want. But if we're talking formal grammar, then normally ain't is not going to be accepted unless we're working within certain kinds of compositional projects. If you're writing a short story and you're using dialogue, then obviously you can use ain't if it works within the confines of the character you're creating. Does that make sense? So in other words, we try and understand the rules of formal grammar so that we can then manipulate them in some way. And I would use that term in my notes. Once you know the rules of formal grammar, you can know when you're breaking them. Does that make sense what I just said? Once you know the rules, you can break them at your leisure, okay? One of the things we try to point out is just because you know the rules of formal grammar does not mean that you get to walk around like some kind of, a critiquer or an English teacher always trying to find everyone else's mistakes. First of all, that's just boring, and second of all, that's just to be a fool, right? In other words, knowing the rules does not mean that you always have to require of people that they keep the rules. For example, you can text all day long and break every one of the formal rules of grammar. It's okay. Why? Because we're working in an informal, environment, right? There is a difference between texting your pal and writing a letter to the governor of the state. Do you got me? And when you write the letter to the governor of the state, you would write formally unless the governor of your state was your daddy. Right? Would you agree? And then you probably would maybe still write informally, right? Depending upon, let's understand it this way, rules vary dependent upon audience, right? So we don't have some kind of myopic or just blind view of these grammar rules. You never can say ain't because it's grammatically incorrect. No. We're not in any way tied into those kinds of understandings of grammar. Do you got me? But, having said all of that, my job is to prepare you for the academic community that you're about to wade into. And I have colleagues at the next level who will fail your paper for one comma splice, who will fail your paper for one incongruity, grammatically speaking. So you need to know the rules. And that will allow you then to go through a process of editing appropriately for the rules. Good news. Not a lot of rules to have to worry about, honestly. The English language is a fairly simple language in terms of formal grammar, believe it or not. Why does it seem so confusing? Well, I think that's maybe because there's lots and lots of people who try and make it a bigger deal than it actually is. Let me explain the origin of grammar rules. English was not a language of its own. It's what we call a hybrid language. In other words, other languages coming together to form the English language. We'll lecture on this when you're seniors in more detail. One of the languages, Latin. The other of the languages, Greek. Hybrid, right? So as English is starting to become a language, Latin and Greek is a part of our language. Well, in Latin, you have legitimately 8 parts of speech. In Greek, you have legitimately 8 parts of speech. These are more complicated languages. So when English began to be a study within the academy as a language unto itself, and they looked around and asked, well, if it's going to be a real language like Latin and Greek, then it needs to have 8 parts of speech. Which is why, wow, starts to be a part of speech. Wow, did you ever study this in middle school? Wow, what am I talking about? What do they call that? Wow, the exclamation mark, we call that a what? Wow, the interjection, right. The interjection is a part of speech? Seriously? I mean, I get it. Nouns, verbs, adjective, adverbs, parts of speech, maybe prepositions and conjunctions, but wow, that's a part of speech? You got to have wow, so you can have 8 parts of speech, even though, of course, you were right when you heard it and said it the first time. Wow is not a part of speech. You're absolutely right. But we had to have 8 parts of speech so that English would be considered a legitimate language. The truth of the matter is, in English, we only have 2 parts of speech. What are you talking about, only 2 parts of speech? That's it. Well, then how come it seems so complicated? I think it's because English teachers want to make themselves look smarter than everybody else. You know what I'm saying? And so let's just go ahead and say it out loud. They ain't but 2 parts of speech, and they're actually very, very simple. So let's go ahead, do a little bit of work. Now, from this point on, from this point on, I'm going to be talking about the written formal rules of grammar. Okay? For example, the last time I checked, nobody speaks with question marks. Although I did hear some 8th graders say the other day, something like going to the mall, question mark, which is kind of, it seems to me, crazy. I mean, obviously speaking in text language, right? That is to say, question mark. But no, when we speak, we often don't keep a lot of the written formal rules of grammar. You can't have a comma splice when you speak. Do you got me? So we're going to be concentrating on when we write. Now, a lot of the grammar rules still apply in spoken language, but there are nuances that we'll not get into today. Maybe in our junior year we'll have more to say about that. Now, we're just talking about the formal rules of written written language, and now we're ready to talk about them. These two parts of speech. All right, so let's go through them real quickly. And by the way, this is my introduction. Now I'm ready to actually give my lecture. My lecture will take all of 15 minutes. I kid you not. That is how simple English grammar is. I've been giving this lecture for a lot of years, and students are like, yeah, right. And then when I finish, they're like, whoa, that's it? That's it? Everything I'm building off of is kind of like the skeleton. Everything else is the way we build beyond it. If you know what I'm about to present here well, you'll know about 90% of the grammar rules that get broken. No kidding. And then once you know these, you can always pick up the other ones that are for you problematic. All right, here we go. Two parts of speech, okay, in the written formal language. You got to have, are you ready for this? I'll just say it this way. You got to have something doing something. Okay, write it down, and we'll talk about it. Okay? For there to be a sentence in the English language, and this, by the way, is what you want to write down. A sentence in the English language. Everything in written formal English is built off of sentences. I don't write sentences when I text. Informal. Informal, right? When we're talking formal, we're talking about the construction of a sentence. And a sentence has always two parts to it. Part one, the way it looks. Right? The way it looks. That is to say, when we're writing formally, there will be some kind of capital letter, a bunch of words in between, and then a punctuation, which will either be a period, a question mark, or wow, an exclamation mark. Which, by the way, we don't use very often in academic writing at all. We stay away from the exclamation marks, okay? For reasons I'll explain stylistically later for you, all right? So in other words, the way it looks, if there is a capital letter, there's a bunch of words in between, and there's some kind of end punctuation of either a period or a question mark, we know that what goes on in between is a sentence. The second thing that makes a sentence is the way it reads. And there, we're talking about this thing. Something doing something. Okay? Now, what does that mean? Well, first of all, we got to have a thing. We put a box around that. We got to have a thing. Now, in the old days, you probably learned this as what? What do we call this thing in a sentence? Subject. Right? We'll call it a subject, won't we? We'll call it a noun, won't we? Wait a minute, I thought you said a noun is a person, place, or thing. Hey, can I just make this simple? Isn't a person a thing? Isn't a place a thing? Isn't a thing a thing? Well, then let's just call it what it is, a thing, all right? So you got to have some thing, right? And it's not enough to have a thing. That thing has to be, circle it, doing something, okay? There has to be some action. Of course, we're going to call this, if it's the opposite of the subject, we can sound really smart and call it the predicate. Yeah, this makes us sound really smart, right? The predicate. Of course, we always will call these verbs, correct? So you got to have some action, don't you? You got to have some action, all right? Simple. So, watch this for a second. Can I just give a little example? How about this one? Don't start singing. Unless you want. Okay, over the river and through the woods. Period. Now, take a look at that sentence. It looks like a sentence, correct? It's got a capital letter, O. It's got end punctuation, a period. Right? Correct? I mean, it does. Wait a minute. It looks like a sentence. Agree?
Yeah.
Right? But we're going to say about this sentence that it is N-A-S. Anybody want to guess what that means? You got it. In my annotative approach, anytime I'm reading your essay and I write N-A-S, it simply means not a sentence. What do you mean not a sentence? Over the river and through the woods? What makes it not a sentence? Well, let's look. We said that there have to be two parts for a sentence, correct? You have to have a thing, and that thing must be doing something. So let's ask, in this sentence, over the river and through the woods, is there a thing? Well, immediately you're going to say, isn't a river a thing? And I'll say, you bet it is. And woods are a thing too, huh? Right. But here's the question. Is the thing actually doing something? In this sentence, is the river doing something? Don't tell me rivers flow. I'm asking, in this sentence, is the river doing anything? It's not. The woods, are the woods doing anything? They're not. They stand still and they're really cold. Yeah, that's not what this sentence is telling us about woods though, right? So we have a thing, but the thing is not doing something, and therefore what is missing in this sentence? How about it? What is missing? We have things, we just don't have predicate, right? We don't have anything that tells us what the thing is actually doing. Do you got me? Therefore, we qualify this as NAS, not a sentence. All right? Do you got me? Okay? Any questions about that? By the way, we call this a fragment, don't we? A partial sentence, correct? Okay? We sometimes refer to it as well as a clause, all right? That is to say, it's not a full sentence. Why? Because we have something, but that thing is not actually doing something, right? Question, go.
Okay, so what about like, what are you doing, or how are you?
Correct, correct. Now these are sentences that have what we call an assumed subject or an assumed predicate sometime, okay, right? And remember, verbs oftentimes can be words like are or is, these words of what we call being, right? So there we're okay. But notice we don't have any of that in this quote-unquote sentence, right? Questions about, I'm halfway through my lecture. No kidding. If you understand what I just said here, half of the mistakes in your writing immediately are fixed. In other words, the number one mistake, you'll want to write this down, the number one mistake freshman writers will make is that they have what looks like a sentence, however, there is not a subject clearly and a predicate clearly. Do you got me? In other words, it's not fully a sentence. Sometimes we call them fragments. Sometimes we call them clauses. Okay? That is to say, they're not a full sentence. All right? So our job then is to try to make sure, anytime in our essays, that we have a capital and end punctuation, we check to make sure that we have both a subject and a verb. And we use that language, S and V. So we will actually begin to go through a process where we will look at every one of our sentences and we will ask a simple question. Do we have a subject, S, a thing? Is it doing something, V, predicate? Got me? Verb. Okay? And we simply will check to make sure. And if we don't, well then obviously we have to make some adjustments. Okay?
So what if it's like after you've already I don't know, when we were little we were said if you had said the name before, then you don't really need to say the name in the next sentence?
Now let's talk about this for a second because this is a fascinating question. And that's our next point. Can I make this observation? Sometimes the thing, can I do it this way? Sometimes the thing in our sentence is what we call fuzzy. Now I don't mean with lots of hair on it fuzzy. That's not what I mean. Okay? I mean not clear. Watch this. I'll play this game with Mr. Schreiber, for example. Mr. Schreiber, if you will indulge me. Mr. Schreiber, by the way, let's do this actually. Mr. Schreiber, will you please give me that? Go ahead, let's do that, shall we? Please, give me. Now see, he's giving me this look. Oh. Okay, see, he knows I'm talking about a thing. Agreed? Agreed? He knows I'm talking about a thing. But it's kind of fuzzy what I'm talking about. Got me? How about this one? Miss Cottrell will play this game with me. Miss Cottrell, isn't he amazing? Do you think he is, by the way, or no? Now see, here's the thing. Miss Cottrell knows that I'm talking about a thing. In this case, I'm talking about a guy thing. Yuck. Right? And I said about him, don't you think he's amazing? To which Miss Cottrell is like, okay, here's the thing. I've known one or two hims or he's, but yeah, you got to tell me who we're talking about before I'm going to agree or disagree. Amazing. Right? How about it? Or we can keep going. What do you think about her? Isn't she something? I mean, really? See, you're like, okay, Miss Bolt's like, okay, she. I know you're talking about a thing, but it's not totally clear to me who we're talking about. Now, these fuzzy words, we know they're things, right? We know they're things, but it isn't clear what thing it is. It's fuzzy. So we have a special word for these kinds of words. What do we call them?
Pronouns.
You're right. These are pronouns. Okay? These are pronouns. Now we have rules about these pronouns for an obvious reason. They can get kind of unclear if we use them, right? Without having some sense of what they're referring to. What thing are you talking about? So for example, I can say to Mr. Schreiber, hey, nice pen, give me that. Now he knows what I'm talking about. See, now he knows what I'm talking about. The thing that we are always in reference to with these pronoun words is what we call the antecedent. Now you can sound really smart by using this term. Ante, that which comes before, right? Hey, Schreiber, nice pen. the antecedent. Give me that pronoun, right? Now he knows what we're talking about, right? So we have a couple of very, very simple rules for pronouns. Very simple. One, we never use the pronoun, and this is kind of where Seidel was going. We never use the pronoun until we first use the antecedent, the thing we're talking about. Easy. Ante, that which comes before. Cedent, antecedent, that which comes before. Nice pen, Schreiber, antecedent. Give me that pronoun. Now it makes sense. On the other hand, if I say, hey, dude, give me that. Dude, what are you talking? Isn't he amazing? See, I don't, you're right, we don't know, okay? So we have a simple rule, and it's one you want to write down, and it's one from here on out. If you violate it, guess what? I'm going to jack your papers for it, and it's this simple rule. We never use a pronoun in the first sentence of a paragraph. Done. We never use a pronoun in the first sentence of a paragraph when we're writing formally. Done. Got me? We don't do it. Instead, what we will always use is the actual antecedent. Once we've used it in the first sentence of the paragraph, we can use a pronoun for the rest of the paragraph, but when we start a new paragraph, we provide the antecedent a second time. Do you got me? Question?
Is that why we have to put A and B in our thesis and beginning paragraphs to show what story we're talking about?
You got it. You got it. Of course, though, you could still reference the story as it, right? It has a very interesting climax.
But you'd have to...
The only problem with that is, it what? The story. Well, what's the name of the story? Dude, it's the story I've been writing on for the last 3 paragraphs. Doesn't matter. You still got to use it. I'm sorry, I should have said this earlier. Let's go back. I'm getting old. How about this? Can I say this? When we play this game of formal grammar, we are playing a game. Boy, write that down. It's so important. We are playing a game. All right? You're working with your university profs. You are engaged in a game of sorts, okay? The game is simple if you know the rules. If you don't know the rules, you can get jacked real quickly and lose the game. Do you got me? Part of playing the game is knowing these rules about pronoun usage. So, we're back to the rules. 1, we don't use pronouns in our first sentences. 2, we always will make sure we stay away. I say always, almost always. We stay away from 2 pronouns. We do not use the pronoun I if we can avoid it. We do not use the pronoun you if we can avoid it. Okay? In formal writing. In informal writing, of course, we do it all the time. I believe that the Cask of Amontillado is a very exciting story with 3 messages. Whoa, whoa, whoa. That's a thesis. I agree, that's a thesis. But who's writing the paper? You are. Why do you need to say, I believe that the Cask of Amontillado has 3 messages? Why don't you just say it? The Cask of Amontillado has 3 messages. Do you got me? You don't need to say I. Most of the time you can edit it out. We stay away from the pronoun you. You should read the Cask of Amontillado. Well, wait a minute. When we're playing this game with who? With an instructor, correct? The instructor, you can assume, has read Cask of Amontillado. He or she assigned it to you, right? So there's no reason to say, you should read the Cask of Amontillado. Do you got me? Now, a little bit more fuzzy is the pronoun we. Sometimes we'll get kind of into gray area when we use we. Sometimes we're not altogether sure. We need to think about freedom. We who? We Americans, we students at Worland High School, we 9th graders at Worland High School. See what I'm saying? The we is again a pronoun where the antecedent is a little bit fuzzy. We try and stay away from these words. Why? We don't want our pronouns to cause confusion. I would write that down. We don't want our pronouns to cause confusion, okay? So, we always make sure we use the antecedent before we use the pronoun. So from here on out in your writing, if I happen to find that you're using pronouns in the first sentences of your paragraphs, or you're obviously, using unclear pronouns with unclear antecedents, I will often point it out to you with a simple question, what's the antecedent here? What's the antecedent here? Okay? And all that means is, what's the thing it's referring to? Simple. Go.
Okay, so you know how we need to go through each sentence and and point out the S and D or whatever.
You got it. You got it. Subject, verb. You got it.
Yeah. So when we're doing that, can we mark the he, she stuff as the subject?
Of course, because it's a what? It's a thing, right? Isn't he cool? Well, the he is obviously a thing.
As long as you have the no. Okay.
You got me? Makes sense. Thanks for the question. Now, here we go. This is a function of sometimes being raised in the, do we call it the right or the wrong place? Okay, so we'll just call it the right, wrong place. How's that? Here it comes. Are you ready for this? I'll put it up here at the top of my board, and then we'll decide whether it's correct or not. Are you ready? This would never happen in room 303. Everyone forgot their homework. I said it never happened. I'm just saying. Everyone forgot their homework. Now, can we just get something out of the way real quickly? Aside from the fact that would never happen in room 303, everybody in this room understands what that sentence means. Would you agree with me?
Yeah.
Right? Also, notice capital letter in punctuation. We got a sentence, it looks like here. Uh-oh, we got a problem. And we got a problem that nasty, mean teachers like Mr. McGee are going to jack your papers for. What are you talking about? This is grammatically wrong? It is. It is. It is a violation of a simple pronoun rule that we call agreement. You want to write that down? Agreement. And then we'll talk about it. Some of you are saying, wow, I'm really glad I came to class today to take notes because I'm learning lots of stuff. For some of us, we're saying, none of what you said to me, Mr. McGee, is brand new. I would hope not, since I'm working with the basics of fundamental grammar that you learned in 3rd and 4th grade. But I'm reviewing with you. And some of these rules you probably learned in middle school. It's just you maybe are needing to be reminded. How about this one? Everyone, singular or plural? One or a whole bunch? Well, underline the word one to remind you that this is singular. Right? There. Singular or plural? One or a whole bunch of ones? There. That is plural. Right? That is plural. How about if I change it and I say everybody? Everybody forgot their homework. Now I'm okay, right? I'm not. Body is also singular. There, plural. So we have a simple rule. We have to make sure that our pronouns are in agreement. This is a pronoun, this is a pronoun. They got to be in agreement in terms of number. So in other words, if I start with singular, I have to continue with singular. Everyone forgot his or her homework. Now here's the deal. If you hear somebody speak like that and use a construction like this, everyone forgot his or her homework, you immediately will know that he or she, notice I didn't say that they are. Did you notice that? I said you will immediately know that he or she is well educated. Right? Notice my construction as I spoke. I said if you hear someone speak this way, then you will know. Notice I didn't say that they are well educated. They is plural. Yeah, we do that all the time when we speak. Right. That's right. Now, is there anything wrong with it? Informally? Not at all. And in fact, everyone forgot their homework is informally absolutely fine. But if we're writing formally, it's called the writing we do in 303 quite a bit of the time. Through the Great Bend. From here on out, we want to pay attention to this agreement thing. So one of the things we're going to do is I recommend a sweep of your paper. That just means you read through your paper looking for certain kinds of errors, okay? We want to pay attention to this thing about pronouns. Questions about any of this? Believe it or not, I'm almost done with my lecture. No kidding. We're covering now some of the major problems. I only got a couple of more to go. Questions? Can I erase? Okay, because I just need more room on my... Oh, how are you supposed to understand any of that secret?
Makes sense to me.
Right? Alright, so here we go. Some of you walked in when you were in your first semester and looked at the board and saw it lectured to seniors, and you probably wondered that. What? How do you even know what's out there? Alright, here we go. Pens and paper out now. Let's talk about a couple of more problems with compositional grammar, syntax. Syntax is the other word for grammar. S-Y-N-T-A-X, right? To answer an earlier question. And here we go. Now we're going to talk about one other problem. All right, shall we? Let's talk. Let's get romantic, shall we? The stars were shining. The moon was bright. Oh, isn't that sweet? Okay, now, you want to write that down, and we're going to analyze it. The stars were shining, the moon was bright. By the way, We started our time together in September. How come this is the first time that you've taught grammar with us? Because I didn't need to. Right? I mean, we were getting along fairly well. Now all of a sudden it's time for us to take the next step. Got me? Let's point out. Do we all understand what that little sentence means? I think we do. I didn't write it in Indonesian or in Mandarin or in Arabic, correct? So we're all fine, correct? However, there is grammatically something fundamentally wrong with this sentence. Seriously? I am serious. And in fact, a loony like McGee will start to jack your papers seriously for an egregious fault like this. What are you talking about, egregious fault? What kind of fault? Well, let's point out something. What is wrong with this? By the way, I got anybody that's been educated enough to know what's wrong with this? What's wrong with this?
In between shining and the, there needs to be like an and.
Well, let's talk about it. Yeah, because Control has been educated enough to know we actually have two sentences here. What? We do, don't we? We have something, can I call it a subject? Right? Doing something. Right? Shining. We have another something, a moon. Correct?
Right.
Doing something. Right? Was bright. Remember, was is a verb. Right? So we have two sentences here.
Should be like a semicolon.
But wait a minute. We have two sentences joined together without any punctuation. Uh-oh. What do we call that?
Run on.
You're right. This is what we call a run-on sentence. I thought a run-on sentence meant that it went on and on and on for a really long time. Dude, does that look like a long sentence to you?
No.
Run-ons have absolutely nothing to do with length. They have to do with a simple infraction. I mean, the formal declaration here is to join two independent clauses together without appropriate punctuation. Okay, can we just make it easy? You got two sentences put together without anything in between. Got me? So Control was dead on right. She said, in between the word shining and the, there needs to be some kind of punctuation, or I've committed what I call a run-on sentence fault. Got me? So I'm going to fix it. The stars were shining, comma, the moon was bright. Yes! Several of you are looking at me like, yeah, I know he's speaking sarcastically at this point. Uh-oh! Wait a minute. The stars were shining, comma, the moon was bright. Boy, oh boy, I hope everybody's now watching my whiteboard closely. What's wrong with that?
There's no,
What's wrong with it? What's it called?
I don't know what it's called. Conjunction. No? McGee?
No.
I was ready to give plus points for anybody that knew this. You guys knew what a run-on was. How could you not know what this is? You're right, Butterfield. It is a comma splice. Well done. Right. Of course, the irony of all ironies is I think you did it in your last paper, didn't you? That's how he knows, huh? Yeah, let's see it real quickly. This is what we call a comma splice. Write it down. We're going to get very, very friendly, warm, and fuzzy with comma splices going forward now. The old man's going to start to jack your papers for this. Comma splice violation, okay? Wait a minute, what is a comma splice? Let's get it now in our notes. A comma splice is when we join two full sentences together with only, and that's the word you want to write down and underline, with only a comma. There you got me. With only a comma. That's what we call a comma splice, all right? Two full sentences. There are three ways that you can fix a comma splice. Let's talk about all three of them. The most obvious way, yeah, there are two sentences, so you just put a period there. The stars were shining, comma. Uh-oh, remember, we got to get a capital T for the, correct? But what if I don't want it to be two sentences because I'm interested in varying my sentence length and I don't want to have these little short choppy sentences? So I like the stars were shining, the moon was bright, but I don't want to have the period there. How do I do that? Two more ways we can do it. One, we can use the comma. It's allowed. But after the comma, we are going to use what we call a coordinating conjunction. Okay? Coordinating conjunction. The stars were shining, comma, and the moon was bright. Okay? So I can do that. I can do that. And that's okay. A final way to do it is I use the comma. Are you ready for this? If I use the comma alone, I don't use a coordinating conjunction. I use the comma. That's wrong and my paper flunks, right? Right. But if I, are you watching me? If I do this and put a little period above the comma, now it's okay? It is. Hey, I didn't make these rules up, I'm just explaining them to you, okay? It's what we call the semicolon. And we can use the semicolon, and then we do not have to use a coordinating conjunction. The great Robert Kennedy, President Kennedy, brilliant man, John F. Kennedy. He was writing for his famous inaugural speech, and he knew that school students all over America and the world would study this speech. And he came up with this great line. Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. It became a very, very famous line. And the minute he wrote it, he knew, great line. He wrote his own speeches. Can you imagine that? Today, presidents will pay guys millions of dollars to write their speeches for them. Although our current president now, much like Kennedy, writes a lot of his own stuff. He is that bright. But Kennedy was able to find this line all by himself. But the minute he wrote it, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country, he knew he had written a what? It was a run-on sentence because he didn't use any punctuation. Ask not what your country can do for you is a sentence. Ask what you can do for your country is a sentence. He had put them together on the page and he immediately recognized, oh, I've written a run-on sentence. I can't do that because school children will be studying this and it makes it look like the president is grammatically faulty. I therefore have to fix the run-on sentence. He could have put a comma.
Semicolon.
Right in the middle. Ask not what you can do for your country. Ask not what your country can do for you, comma.
But.
Ask what you can do for your country. But the minute you put the comma and only the comma, we got a good comma splice. So he had to use a coordinated conjunction, right? Ask, and he actually didn't use but. He actually used the word rather, okay, because he was from New England. Ask not what your country can do for you, comma, rather. Ask what you can do for your country. And grammatically it was okay, but he didn't like the sound of it when it was spoken aloud. Remember, he was writing a speech. This is an inaugural speech. He's going to say it. He liked the staccato nature of the language, punctuating the words, without any kind of coordinating conjunction. So he went with the semicolon. Ask not what your country can do for you, semicolon. Ask what you can do for your country, period. And then he had a very fine sentence, and one memorable as well. And we might even say, as American citizens, true. Observation, though, for your notes. We want to be careful about not overusing the semicolon. Okay? We do not want to overuse this piece of punctuation. It can get us into some trouble if we overuse it. All right? Okay. Also, we have a very simple rule that go ahead and just write in your notes. When we are using the coordinating conjunction, however, for example, we have a certain understanding of the grammatical rules of that conjunction. Okay? How about this? Watch this. The Warriors, can I wave our flag? The Warriors played hard, however, they lost. Period. Okay? Now, I want to point out something here. I've already injected the coordinating conjunction of however. Do you see it? We have a simple rule when we use this kind of construction. The Warriors played hard, semicolon. Right? We use a semicolon. However, comma.
No, you say comma.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, those should just be two commas, shouldn't they?
However, semicolon. Okay? The boys played hard, however, semicolon, comma. Okay? It's just a construction that we use in academic language. All right? Do you got me? Okay? So this will allow for you to show proper education going forward, especially with the coordinating conjunction, however. Okay? Questions? Believe it or not, we're done.
So with however, you have to use 2 semicolons.
One semicolon. The second is a comma. You got
So
it.
wait, what happened? However, I guess it has a rejection.
It can. It can. In the way I've used it, which is why I've explained it that way. Now, last thing we want to comment on, real quickly. This is for your notes, what we call sweeps of your paper. Sweeps of your paper. It works like this, upside down pyramid. When you first finish and start the editing process, the first thing that you want to do is to just look at the general thesis and POVs of your paper. Make sure you're writing to the assigned topic. Who cares grammatically if you're correct, if you're writing on the wrong topic? Secondly, we want to spend time with our sentence construction and make sure that we have no NASs. Does that make sense? That is to say, make sure for every sentence you have an S and a V. Let me give you a suggestion. You can take your essay and turn it into a worksheet. You go to the end punctuation of every sentence and hit the return key and then print your paper. So it looks like a worksheet. Go down that worksheet and simply put S and V above every subject and verb. If you can do that, you know you have full sentences. If you can't do that, you know you've got to fix some issues. Does that make sense? The third thing that I recommend that you do in terms of sweeps is then to begin to look at punctuation issues, especially in terms of pronoun usage, comma splices, that kind of thing. And then the last sweep I recommend is that you start looking at the specific words themselves. So for example, using your thesaurus and some of these other kinds of things. Now when we get down here, watch my whiteboard, this is what we call issues of style, not syntax. Style. By that we mean, not so much what you say, but rather how you say it. The word good is understandable, but we can find better words than good, and therefore we try to expand our vocabulary. Obviously, we as well want to pay attention because sometimes spell checkers do not make the distinctions between there, and there. Do you understand what I just said?
Yeah.
Right? And so we're paying attention to specific words as well. Questions, comments, observations? All right, guys.